Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Nargis Kasyanova, and I'm a senior fellow at the Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies, running its program on Central Asia. Thank you for joining us today for a discussion on ongoing developments in Kazakhstan, co-organized together with our partners, Central Asian Program at George Washington University and the Oxford Society for Central Asian Affairs. As we all know, last month, the country was shaken by a series of dramatic and tragic events, first sparked by protests in Western Kazakhstan and quickly resulting in outbreaks of violence, allegedly orchestrated by members of the elites, a shakeup of the political system, the removal of Nazarbayev and some of his top people, the invitation and arrival of CSTO peacekeepers, a counter-terrorist operation accompanied by mass crackdown and horrendous illegal actions by law enforcement bodies, partial retreat from that and promises to investigate cases of abuse of power, the announcement of major reforms. And these are just top highlights. For decades, we had been waiting for Godot, the political transition, Kazakhstan after Nazarbayev. Now it seems that the Godot has arrived. But it's probably more accurate to say that it's more than Kazakhstan after Nazarbayev. It's Kazakhstan after bloody January that we see emerging. So what's going on and where might the country be heading? To shed some light on this very complex situation, we invited the best, most knowledgeable people, and I will introduce them in the order that I will ask them to give their initial remarks. We'll start with Evgeny Zhovtis, who is a prominent human rights lawyer and the director of the Kazakhstan International Bureau for Human Rights and the Rule of Law, as well as a member of the OSCE or DIHR panel of experts on freedom of assembly and the board of the International Bar Association Human Rights Institute. Then we'll go to Dr. Sergei Gretsky, who is the academic director at the Foreign Policy Academy at Georgetown University and a lecturer at the Department of Politics at the Catholic University of America. In 2000-2014, he was the chair of Central Asian Advanced Area Studies at the Foreign Service Institute, the US Department of State. He's the author of Russia's Policy Towards Central Asia and of a number of book chapters and articles on economic development, political economy, Islam, domestic and foreign policy issues of Central Asian states. And Sergei has been following political developments in Kazakhstan for decades. Then we'll turn to, welcome Sergei, welcome again. Then we will go to Eldar Abdrazakov, who is the founder and CEO of the Centras Group, Kazakhstan's leading investment house with focus on financial services, insurance and consumer services, and chair of the board of directors at Fortebank, the country's fourth largest bank. He serves on the board of Kazakhstan Stock Exchange and Air Astana, the leading regional airline in Central and South Asia. He is also chairman of the Kazakhstan Competitiveness Council and the Kazakhstan Grow Forum, a private sector competitiveness think tank. And I'm very happy to say that Eldar is a member of the Davis Center Advisory Board. Welcome, Eldar. Last but not least, we'll go to Aida Dasayeva, who is director of the strategic communication agency TAN Consulting. She has more than 2 decades of experience of working in the areas of business development and strategic and government communications, holding management positions in Microsoft Kazakhstan and Central Asia, Kazakh mobile operator Kcell, Alpha Bank. She also served as member of the board of directors of Kazinform and Kazcontent. Welcome, Aida. Without further ado, let's move to our discussion, and I want to start with you, Evgeny. In the aftermath of January events, what are the most important developments in the areas of human rights and rule of law, and what prospects do you see? The floor is yours.
Good morning, good evening to everybody. Thank you for having me. Let's start with what I want to remind you, the speech which Mr. Tokayev made in the parliament on 11th of February. He said that he will start certain kind of economical reforms, trying to resemble, to reset the economy, which was clearly stated oligarchic type of clan economy with a high level of corruption, trying to create more competitive environment for economical development. Second, he said he will start with the social reforms, or trying to eliminate social injustice, inequality, and so on. But what he said next, he said that in September, 9 months later, he will start with the set of political reforms. Why I'm reminding you this? Because this week he said that he will announce the political reforms in March and not in September. Why? Because it's obvious that the political system is practically incapable. It does not address the grievances of the people, and it is typically monopolized, which he wants now to overcome, because he saw that the system is not working. It's not working for many reasons. It creates the inability of the state apparatus. It creates the lack of the competence. It's loyalty versus meritocracy. There is a lot of problems which he is facing. Okay, when we turn to the human rights, of course, we should acknowledge that the human rights development depends fully on the political context. Until we are living in a totally authoritarian state, it's not only the problem of the political system as such, it's the problem of in a number of areas. Number one, legislation. If we look at the legislation which was developing for 30 years, it have nothing to do with international standards of, for example, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of peaceful assembly, freedom of association, and so on and so on and so on. But besides that, what I want to address, to make the key point, is about institutions. Look, we have the same post-Soviet institutions like intelligence, police, judiciary, and prosecutor's office. If you look at their stuff, these are the new generation who were born after the collapse of the former Soviet Union or in the end of the former Soviet Union. Why they are doing the same? Why they are behaving the same? Because this is the institutions which are replicating themselves, which inside themselves are working and making the people to use the same habits, the same systematic approach. That's why we are now absolutely amazed with this level of torture, of ill treatment, lack of access to the lawyer, lack of access, lack of the right to call to the relatives, through all these months of, let's say, sort of crackdown, not only on the peaceful protesters, of course. There was a lot of people who committed violence and so on. But in general, you see a lot of problems, and the society is shocked. It is shocked, but it was not shocked. It was clear, because it happens all through the years of the same system, which is not very difficult to reform. And finally, practices or practical implications. If we have legislation which do not, let's say, so comply with international standards, with the institutions which are post-Soviet and with the authoritarian state through which it is all working, what practices we could expect? These are some points which I want, let's say, to put in the first part of my small presentation. And the second part, what to do. Mr. Tokayev, if even he has the political will to move forward in that direction, he has to make very important steps toward the political reforms and the institutional reforms of the key basic state institutions, which were the axis of the Nazarbayev regime, because the regime was relying exactly on the Committee on National Security, prosecutor's office, police, and judiciary. It was their tools, their key cornerstones. Now you have to reform that and put yourself at risk and be not sure how the elites will react. That's, I am very cautious in what he could and should do. On one hand, he has very clear challenges, because the society starts very angry. You see that in the western part of the country, there are still strikes, and there is a lot of protests with the low wages, with the inequality and so on. There are still a number of labor conflicts are underway. Secondly, the people are very angry with all these torture and other issues and the killings and the lack of transparency, lack of investigation and so on, that he has to react. But on the other hand, he has to look how the state apparatus, which was built for 30 years, could react. Thus, I think that there is a lot of challenges, a lot of problems, which at this point I do not see how, and he has clearly the deficit of time. He had to react as quick as possible. That's, we used to say that the president is the key figure according to our constitution. He has such kind of enormous of power, but usually it's not because of the constitution. It's because of the authority, which is enrooted in society. To what extent he has such authority and how he could overcome that? This is the key question in the nearest future, year or two. Thank you.
Thank you very much. But can I push you a little bit? Like, if you were asked for an advice by President Tokayev, what you would advise him to do? What he, given the constraints and all that, but what would be the first steps?
Let's put this way, in the sphere which I'm interested in, I'm speaking not politically now, but from the human rights point of view. I will give you a very simple example. Why there were so many complaints about the torture, about ill treatment, and so on in the law enforcement, and especially in the pretrial detention centers and other temporary detention centers, because the whole system is still under the Ministry of Interior. That the first institutionally, it should be immediately removed. It should be immediately put under the civic agency and immediately start to, that the access to these, let's say, so facilities should be only according to the law and not because it belongs to the same institution, which is interrogating, let's say, arresting, and so on. It should be said about penitentiary system, and it should be said about the whole system of pretrial detention. Secondly, I think what we should start with the very clear vision, what political structure will look like, and how the real political pluralism will be, let's say, introduced. We need the new legislation on elections, absolutely new. We need the new constitution, absolutely. We need the new, let's say, so we should reform prosecutor's office, we should reform intelligence and so on. What the society, at least in my opinion, will accept, that it will be clear what you are planning to do, it will be discussed openly and publicly, and then the society will wait for some time, how it will be developed with the very clear steps with of social and economical nature. This, of course, is the first one. But there should be very clear vision how the system will be rebuilt. Otherwise, it still be on the same path.
Thank you very much. I'm sure there will be many questions. Sergey, can we go to you for your thoughts on the current political scene configuration? What can happen? What are the prospects?
Okay, thank you for having me. I will start with sort of what happened and where sort of Kazakhstan may be moving, which is still not quite clear. Why was the coup? So we're talking about an attempted coup. Why was it staged? There has been consensus in Kazakhstan, especially, that Tokayev was viewed as an interim president between Nazarbayev and a member of Nazarbayev family or clan. So one may ask, why not wait until 2024, the next presidential elections, and sort of ensure that transition back to Nazarbayev family? It's clear that Tokayev did not live up to expectations and was becoming increasingly independent. exact motivations and reasons are yet to be known. But let me remind you of the two moves that he did as president that bracket that what we now know as the beginning and end of the transition period. One of his first acts was freezing of a highly corrupt Nur Sultan light train project connected to the Nazarbayev family and financed by China. One of his last acts was perhaps little noticed at the time, was happened last November when a court case was initiated by the tax police to liquidate the company that owned and ran the Altin Orda market due to tax evasion. That market was owned by Bulat Nazarbayev, and as we know, played an important part in the coup d'etat by furnishing armed gangs that ransacked Almaty and set it ablaze. So he was clearly making moves to curtail the power and economic power of the Nazarbayev family, and testing his own rules and borders of his own possibilities as president. The two implied coup leaders and beneficiaries where it's clear for everyone, I think, where Nazarbayev nephews, brothers Samat Abish and Kairat Satibaldi, whom some argue Nazarbayev trusted more than his own children. The goal was to create enough chaos and unrest to force Nazarbayev to relinquish his presidency, stage new elections that would return undivided power back to the family. Why it failed, we know that no one expected Tokayev to act decisively, and his bold move to invite the CSTO peacekeepers to support his presidency. Why are we talking about international terrorism? Once again referenced yesterday during Tokayev's meeting with Putin. It's also kind of from what we can parse out from Tokayev's own statements and other reports, it's also connected to Samat Abish and Kairat Satipaldi. Tokayev mentioned that headquarters of those sort of coup plotters / terrorists were in a hotel Kazakhstan in Almaty. The only if not leader, member of those terrorists whom the Prosecutor General's office named so far is Wild Arman. And we heard from Tokayev himself that the airport was taken over by those terrorists to allow two planes land from an sort of a unspecified country who brought those terrorists into Kazakhstan. So the only sort of a common link between those three elements of that sort of a coup plot is Turkey. Hotel Kazakhstan is owned by Meshetian Turks. Wild Arman arrived in Kazakhstan in December from Turkey, where he has established ties with political and criminal elites, and who should have been apprehended because there's a arrest warrant for him, but he was not. He was let into the country. And the airport is owned by a Turkish company. So Kairat Satebaldi specifically was sort of sponsoring an Islamist party with a failed project, which is also has been rumored to be tied to the ruling party in Turkey. So we're seeing sort of a very interesting development, and the reason maybe why we haven't heard that unspecified country where those terrorists allegedly arrived from is sort of the fact that I think it should be cleared between between Tokayev and President Erdogan. But everything points in the direction of Turkey. And that's an interesting development sort of in terms of geopolitics and foreign policy of Kazakhstan, because Turkey has been pushing for the establishment of the organization of Turkic state, which happened in 2021. And again, it's a very sensitive subject, and I'm sure that's why we will not hear any details about those alleged terrorists for quite some time. Another important, also a bit on foreign policy, but in the same venue, development to watch is another country that can potentially be named as the source of those terrorists. If you remember, in October 2021, Kazakhstan signed an intergovernmental agreement with the United Arab Emirates, which was to draw $6 billion worth of investment by UAE into Kazakhstan. On January 10th of this year, the Kazakhstani government has withdrawn that agreement from ratification by the Kazakhstani parliament. And one would ask why that happened. If you remember, one of the first developments after the unrest or the coup started was the only announcement, whether true or not, that Kairat Satebaldi was in the UAE and that he was allegedly arrested. We haven't heard anything about him or Samat Abish at all since, well, we heard about Samat Abish, but nothing about Kairat Satebaldi. So was the decision dictated to withdraw the ratification of that agreement dictated by the fact that UAE refused to extradite Kairat Satebaldi? We also know that most members of the Nazarbayev family fled to the UAE. So it would be interesting to watch sort of that development to understand both domestic and foreign policy of Kazakhstan. Two political changes. As Evgeny mentioned, President Tokayev announced that the framework of political reforms would be announced in March. A number of important changes have already happened, as we know. Political Council of Nur Otan, the ruling Nur Otan party, has been substantially changed. At the first glance, we now see that 50% of members of that council are women. We have a new speaker of Majlis, and just days ago, a new Majlis member, a handicapped woman, was sworn in. So these are important signals to the society. What kind of political reforms we can expect? It's difficult to sort of foresee, but what we can parse out from Tokayev's statements, and particularly his interview to Khabar on Agency on January 29th, that he wants to have a Majlis with 3 strong political parties, specifically referencing Germany as a model where different political parties can come together and consensually arrive, if needed, to the formation of a coalition government, and where sort of all the discussions are done in that sort of a consensual form. He also talked about the need to change Kazakhstani political culture. I hope that the number 3 would not be taken literally by people who are working on the reform, as it often happens in systems like that. There are already 3 political parties in the Majlis, but again, we should expect that other established political parties like AUIL, the Agrarian Party, which represents the majority of the Kazakh-speaking population, will once again be in the new parliament, which would, I'm sure, be formed as a result of the election soon after Tokayev announces his reform plan. There's also a need for a strong center-right party, similar to the original democratic choice of Kazakhstan and the original Akjol party. But that said, I do not expect Kazakhstan to move to the German parliamentary system of government type of regime. I think we will should expect the move toward the French presidential parliamentary system. There are, of course, possible pitfalls. The situation is still very uncertain. And number 1 is certainly a loss of credibility and legitimacy of political reforms. Evgeny mentioned that there's a need for those reforms to be worked out in consultation with the civil society, with the same kind of consensus that Tokayev, or near consensus that Tokayev mentioned. Because all the political parties that were created, most of the political parties that were created in Kazakhstan before were, in the words of the former leader of AUIL, Gani Kaliyev, a rukotvorny party, handmade and handheld. So new parties need to be headed, allowed to be established or re-established by popular leaders to give the whole process of political system change, again, credibility and legitimacy. The second pitfall is nihilism and impatience of civil society activists who have already demanded instant change and instant results, denying Tokayev time and opportunity to consolidate his power, because rocking the boat at this point plays only into the hands of those who oppose Tokayev reforms. Here in the United States and in the West in general, example to which those many civil society activists look at, we have a sort of a good tradition of 100 days, allowing incoming administration, presidency, about 100 days to, again, come to power, initiate their policies before passing judgment on the sort of the results of that administration and passing judgment about the trajectory of a government. There's also a possibility of Kazakhstani thermidor. Kazakhstani political and economic system, which in many cases is one and the same, and we'll hear about Eldar, is thoroughly corrupt. And you cannot just displace all of those bureaucrats and politicians instantly. They sort of at best, they may attempt to resist and sabotage, which President Tokayev already referenced as happening, and sort of stage a counter push, coup, you name it, because it always has happened in history, and there will be at some point that moment in Kazakhstan. There's still a lot of sort of a wealthy people who stand to lose a lot if those reforms sort of proceed too quickly and will have that like sweeping character. So sequencing and dosage are important, because that thermidor may happen as a result of the same parliamentary elections, new parliamentary elections that everyone is expecting. Let me remind you of what happened in Russia in 1993, when after President Yeltsin won the battle with the Supreme Soviet, new elections were called in, and pro-Yeltsin parties, democratic parties, gained only slightly over 22% of the vote. It was a sort of a complete failure and setback for the Yeltsin regime, which set it later on a different course that was actually away from, again, democracy and more toward authoritarianism. So again, we should always bear it in mind, because systemic change in Kazakhstan, while a possibility not unlikely, what people hoped for and expected in 1991, is still uncertain. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sergey. A lot of food for thought. One super difficult question: is there a way to build political parties, kind of avoiding this pitfall of having them, you know, being the instruments of oligarchs? I don't know if you can answer this question. It's a billion-dollar question.
I did not mention the original democratic choice of Kazakhstan and the original Akjol party for sort of a nothing. Those were legitimate grassroots built political parties that garnered following around, all around Kazakhstan. It was not regionally based, and by all segments, socio-economic segments of the population. And the leaders of those parties were viewed again as legitimate. Another reason why they, not just their agenda, but the leaders themselves were sort of legitimate, genuine, which is why, again, people followed those parties. And in that sense, I'm glad to see Bulat Abilov, a very charismatic character, which is a politician, which is what Kazakhstan now needs for returning to politics. Because leaders like him, there's, of course, Uras Jandosov and other people who were leaders of the original Akjol and DBK, are still there and can sort of once again, if they want, of course, there should be sort of a willingness on their part to establish such a party. There's also a ecological green party that has existed in Kazakhstan. Again, this issue has become very important, especially now. So I assume a lot of young people would be sort of willing to join the party, which again has to have representation in the parliament, if only because it will look good for Kazakhstan's image, particularly in the West. But for that, we need, again, that threshold for political parties to form and to enter the parliament be lowered. Okay. And because, again, there's a demand for a political change, and it can only come in the form of, again, new political parties emerging and them being able to get representation in the parliament.
Absolutely. We identified already two core things that absolutely need to be done to move forward, and that's the major overhaul of the law enforcement system and the emergence of genuine parties that will create this horizontal links and vertical links in the
again Nargis, if I may, and again our will party, the agrarian party, which has existed, was previously in represented in the Majlis, but then again pushed over. Again, it represents it's a real party. It represents, again, mostly the Kazakh-speaking population of Kazakhstan, which who need that representation and their sort of wishes, ideas to be represented and aired in the parliament, not just somewhere on the sidelines. It's already there. But it has to, again, the system needs to be overhauled in terms of lowering the threshold for those parties to be represented in the parliament.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And less efforts from the top to manipulate.
Well, that goes without saying that, again, we need those new elections, of course, which will happen. Again, not managed elections, because again, the country needs something of, at this point, I think, something comparable to the Supreme Soviet of the Soviet Union of 1989, when everyone got a chance to vent their frustrations, their sort of ideas about the future of the Soviet Union. Many of you may remember that the whole country stopped sort of working and watched those proceedings, because it was the first time when the Soviet sort of citizens were able to freely express what they thought about the Soviet political system and what kind of change they need. And frankly speaking, for, again, Tokayev, and not just for the Kazakhstani society, but for Tokayev himself, such a catharsical sort of experience through in the Majlis is needed to again to hear what people really want and need in order for Kazakhstan to move forward.
Yes, well, venting and expressing, that's voicing, is very important, but I think he also needs the cooperation and and ideas. I personally, I don't see very clear set of ideas, you know, how Tokayev and his team want to reform the country. And with that, let me turn to Eldar. Eldar, how do you assess the socio-economic reforms that have been announced and the kind of these first steps that have been taken, and how do you see the prospects?
Yes, thank you, Nargis. My pleasure to be here. Maybe I'll give this perspective from the economic point of view, because I have our fellow speakers, and I'll speak on the political side. Maybe I'll give the perspective from the economic side, because you have mentioned that social economic, I would say, initiatives, which we're still waiting, and we'll see how actually it will go. I think it's a good foundation to start the discussion, because we have the one political side. On the other side, we see the rookie mistakes of the new administration, which is, I would like just to bring the more context here, because over past 2 years, we lived in the kind of the pandemic environment, when all the restriction was, levied on the population. And we saw the quite an extensive impoverishment on the mass level. On the other side, we saw that all the supply chains which were established were broken. And I personally was struck by the event which happened in January. For me, it was a surprising, unexpected, and certainly I was not expecting such kind of the mass unrest. And it's the first time we saw such a burning cars, buildings, which is unprecedented for Kazakhstan. I may say there were some unrest, but such kind of the mass scale was for us unprecedented. On the other side, I would say it's mass looting which happened. And I also chair the board of one of the largest banks in Kazakhstan. I would say it's also, I would personally would not expect from the people. I was as surprised as we usually have this case in Kazakhstan of the Katrina, when the Katrina in New Orleans, I think it's year 2005, was such a surprise event happened even in the US. And from that point of view, maybe I'll just try to stay more independent in the view, in the critical, and look from the economic perspective, because I have other colleagues who are speaking on the political side. And because for me, it's a number of questions coming. Certainly the economy, which is we got, and also chairing the Kazakhstan Competitiveness Council. And for the past 9 years, I was involved in just a discussion how to make our economy more competitive. And from that point of view, I will just will look from the framework of the past 50 years rather than last 10 or 20 years, and try to say how actually try to compare what is the action what kind of action the new government would be, because start with the recent event, because this unrest was triggered. And usually such kind of unrest and what we call the velvet revolutions is usually triggered by the inflation. And the same happened in Kazakhstan. Inflation over past year was 20 to 30%, and in real terms, it's far more than officially declared. And certainly for the lower level, for the mass level, it was very painful. And we should analyze what is the roots of this inflation. First of all, I would say certainly over past 2 years was quite an extensive governmental loose fiscal policy, when they have the new budgetary initiatives, what is actually brought more money supply to the market. And we have this quite a monetary side when the money was too easy to available. On the other side, we saw the impoverishment on the mass level, and that is brought that people couldn't afford themselves higher prices. And there is also one event which is I would like to emphasize today. That is the used last year the using the pensions from the state fund for the personal use. And we have the 3 trillion tenges, which is came from the state pension funds and went to the, I would say, in the hands of the population and ended up in property market, which is on average in Almaty, we had the property prices went up 30% and the rental prices doubled. And especially it was painful for people having the lower prices because for them it was quite an unaffordable event. And certainly it was a trigger the more tensions on that level, and the population was really with the new prices which were supposed to be introduced in January 2022 was certainly this new signs of inflation and hyperinflation was uncomfortable. And even we may say that the prices on the gas, which was new prices, was even lower than in neighboring Kyrgyzstan, I would say poorer country than Kazakhstan or even compared to Russia. Certainly for us, the triggered event when the people started demanding, I would say, a certain limit on the inflation. That is, looking at the perspective of the economy, I would say the problem is more deeper than today. The people, they feel that today the government, their actions comes quite incompetent, and they see the growing inequality, they see and sense corruption, and they see and sense the unfairness in the system, and they feel that they're sick and tired with all these attempts and all this reforming, and they're ready from the point of view, if before they were looking flight or fight, more prepared to ignore and flight, today they are more prepared to come and to fight with the government, and because they don't see at the end of the day light at the end of the tunnel. And I'm a bit concerned that the new measures and new initiatives by the government will be more populistic in nature, and certainly will not change and will not lead to the more fixing more complex and complicated problem of the economy, which is coming more rooted into the more, it's, I would say, legacy of the Soviet economy, which is quite a heavily concentrated economy, heavily concentrated on the commodities production. And Kazakhstan, after the breakup of Soviet Union, 25% of the population and workable force was engaged in agriculture, and today it's reduced. But still, it's a largely inefficient workforce. Only 2.5% of the workforce is engaged in the extractive industries out of 10 million. And we see that the government tried to diversify the economy, but their action was ineffective. We saw that over the past 20 years, the government increased the employment in education sector, doubled in employment in healthcare sector. But unfortunately, when the government pursuing still the old style command economy, more administrative measures of running the economy, it's led to quite a significant drop in quality in this sector. And today people see that there is, we see the increasing inequality. We see that no perspective, no meritocracy, or no way for the educated people to prosper in this country. And certainly it's start raising the questions. And I'm afraid that short-term measures will be addressing short-term problems. And I think this problem of the legacy in the economy of Kazakhstan will stay, because I would like maybe to try to, I'm just try to review the ideas of legacy of President Nazarbayev and what he wanted to create in this country. And certainly it looks like, for me, he wanted to create the private ownership-based market economy. He wanted to create it to innovative industrialization and more industrialized economy. And he wanted to do it through the control reforms. And unfortunately, when you don't have the certain proper system in place, and you don't have the proper market institution, and you don't have the missing civil institution, unfortunately, it will lead that the government will stay blinded, will stay far away from the reality what we face today, and with unfortunately with such a quite a widespread corruption, even the West, the best initiatives will may end up in the quite unpopular actions in the society. From that point of view, I would say, coming to my colleagues from the political side, I think it's today it's a time when we need to change from the top-down approach of the government, look for more self-development, self-organization. Let the, I would say, we have the missing link between the state and the individuals. What we say that is the more creation by the Bolsheviks. We destroyed the community level, and the community level, there is no institution created. We need to go and we still have to like 2.5 years to start fixing the system. It's too short period of time, but we need to move in this direction.
Thank you very much, Eldar. What's your take on this people's IPO idea that is now widely discussed?
I would say very populistic. There is one way saying the people's IPO, if we're saying that if the people would have the free money, I would certainly support that. But it's primarily voices which are coming, it's saying that it will be better management and better running of the state-owned enterprises. I would separate that. It's very populistic, and from that point of view, I would say we need to separate the running the properly, finding mechanism for finding effective owners, which is missing. We need to demonopolize the economy. We need to, because over past 25 years, we created de facto privately owned monopolies, and we need to demonopolize. But still, we have very weak capacity to create and nurture new industries, which is that is something which is, I would say, even President Nazarbayev is uncomfortable because of the past 30 years, still Kazakhstan was not really effective in creating and nurturing new industries, which is not easy, and there are just the number of the countries which were successful in doing that, they're just very limited.
And if you had to single out one reform that you think is crucial and feasible, maybe, which one?
I would say it's a demonopolization. That is something, it's a monopolies because they are created there. But the short term for the government is certainly it should stop creating the ineffective and bringing, I would say, unsmart money into the system. Okay,
thank you very much. Aida, we'll turn to you. And well, Sergey talked about sending signals to the society. Eldar just mentioned this missing link between also the state and society. You are an expert on communications and strategic communications. What's your take on the situation, on the condition of communications between state and society? And obviously that's very, very important for governance. Good communication is important for governance, but in times of crisis, it becomes even more important. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much, Nargizem. I see that time is ending, and I would like to be disciplined. I will take my 7 minutes.
An hour and a half. We still have 35 minutes, so don't worry. We have some time for. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I would like to take this opportunity and thank Davis Center for Russian Studies, all participants, and you, Nargis, for your interest and support to the topic and today's discussion. Let me give a brief overview on the state communications and state society trust. Speaking on government communications, I mean both communications via digital channels and communications in the media. Government communications in Kazakhstan are increasingly becoming the subject of negative discussions, both in the media classic, and on social networks. Our authorities over the course of at least last 10 years have not been able to take an advantage of digital tools for building confidence and trust with the society. In the conditions of worse socio-economic situation, criticism of the government has become more regular and sharper, especially in social media. This is evidenced by the comments to the posts in social media of government officials and opinion leaders' pages. The comments are mostly skeptical, have a negative tone, and say itself that people do not trust the authorities and their communication. To summarize, the attitude towards state communications in the country is quite critical and negative. There are many reasons for this, and below we will briefly dwell on them. During pandemic, we saw that our state bodies and government policymakers were not ready to work in the new conditions, pandemic. Back in lockdown, I have conducted a survey in the professional communities, mostly communication experts. And in particular, I asked why our state bodies failed to cope with the challenges of the times. According to survey, respondents called two major reasons of failure. 70% of respondents called as a reason the lack of communication strategy, government communication strategy, and 60% of respondents named unpreparedness for crisis situations or absence of anti-crisis communication plans. Besides, the situation is complicated by the fact that people have lost faith and trust in the state authorities. More than a quarter of the respondents named the following: they are tired of listening to lies, government agencies are not able to control the situation. Moreover, the lack of electoral experience and the practice of communicating with the media and the society is a fact influencing that government officials, as a rule, underestimate the role of communications and look at the communication process as something secondary, I would say insignificant. This is a general picture of the state communication in our country. People don't believe official reports. They are tired of lies, pretense, lack of different opinions, except for the opinion of policymakers. The tone of state communication is edifying, instructive, controlling, and restrictive. Also, we see that communication between state and society in the country set up as communications between an adult and a child, rather than communication between two adults. Our government decides everything for us and about us. After tragic and dramatic January events, I believe that our country is not ready for crisis situation at all. And not only from the point of anti-crisis communications. I live 300 meters from mayor's office in Almaty and heard bullets for almost 24 hours for several days. For almost two and a half days, we were in complete ignorance of what was happening. The first speech of the president on what the country has experienced took place on 5th of January and the second on 7th of January. To be honest, we didn't receive enough information on what happened in the country. The internet was completely turned off and we were told that it was turned for security reasons. What does it mean? Actually, it means that the whole operations in the country were stopped. And in this, not just availability of the internet because of information need. Banks, payment systems, retail, transport, and all infrastructure did not work well. Damage to the economy of the country is much deeper than just the destruction of buildings and the sprawl of shops, but the authorities are silent about this. In light of today's discussion, I conducted one more survey among communication experts. 25 communication experts took part in this survey. It's interesting to share result of the survey with you. 61 of respondents do not trust government communications. About 80% of respondents mark the degree of trust between the state and the society with a rating of 5 or less. By the way, maximum mark was 10. Respondents called state communications during the January events 56% as belated, 47% as incomprehensible, and 65% as unsystematic. Respondents noted that very, very rarely in these communications they feel empathy, sympathy, and constructive proposal. Disconnection from the internet during the January events were justified as necessary only by 37% of communication experts. 47% believe that it was not necessary to turn off, and 13% believe that there was another solution in the country. We also asked respondents what exactly can be improved, added, changed in public communication in order to restore trust. Based on the result of survey, we believe that An effective government communication should be a two-way process that involves clear messages delivered via appropriate channels and platforms, tailored for diverse audiences and shared by trusted people. Ultimately, the long-term success depends on developing and maintaining public trust. We believe the government policymakers can engender widespread public support and participation through increased and ongoing community engagement. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Aida. If you could recommend one step, one important step, what would you recommend?
You see, Nargis, what lessons should we learn? It's really difficult to come up with lessons and steps when we still don't know what exactly happened and what are baseline indicators of this case. Moreover, without democratic reform, open and honest elections, law enforcement reform, as Evgeny Zhovty said, it is difficult to propose instruments to set up trust in society and professional government communication. However, in terms of communication, we should follow some basic rules, which everybody in communication knows. Anti-crisis communication should be in place beforehand and based on the risk matrix and state crisis plan. They should be open, honest, and do not lie, and hear and listen to the society and citizenship and taxpayers. This is very, very simple, I believe.
Okay. Thank you very much. And we received very good questions from our viewers. And well, one accusation actually that we repeat sort of Tokayev's propaganda and talk about riots rather than human rights abuses and torture. I didn't notice a single reference to riots. I don't think any of us used the word. And we did talk about the abuses of power by law enforcement. But let me go to you, Evgeny. One question was on mass shootings. And when did mass shootings start, and how do you see that, and what triggered them, and also what will happen in the future if Tokayev does not address the situation properly? Will protests return? And what do you think the commissions that have been created to look into police abuse related to January's unrest, and are they enough to create some trust between state and society?
First of all, I want to add something to what was said by my colleagues, that it was very complicated how these events developed, because we have a long history of mass protests and there was never any violence. Usually, there were a few cases which was mentioned, I think, by Sergei, that it was the case in Zhanaozen in 2011, where there were provocators and then the use of the force by the police. And then there was the case in Shanrak, in Almaty, it was 2006 and then 2011. Usually, we do not have any kind of clashes with the police. Police used to use brutal force, usually. Police usually arrest people, use kettling and all other tactics to circle people, to bring them to the police stations, to detain, including the women, children, absolutely peaceful protesters. And never clashes, never burning cars or something like that. That's the originally peaceful protest turned into violence with a group of provocators, with a group of Islamic radicals to a certain extent, by the group of the close to the militant group, close to the local elites, and so on and so on. But what is important, I think, and what we missed in that regard is why the police acted in the way it acted and how the intelligence acted. Because it is very interesting, from my point of view, systematic issue that the local law enforcement, including intelligence, prosecutors' offices, and police, they are more, let's say, linked to the local elites rather than to the high-level chain of commands. That's why, to a certain extent, the CSTO forces were abroad, because there was some kind of suspicions of lack of loyalty and lack of understanding whether and how, because they are part of these local systems plus commercialized part, because this is very commercial relations as well, not only in the sense of the rule of law, promotion of law and rule of law. When it starts mass shootings, it was not really mass shootings in the beginning, because I am living in the center of Almaty, not far from the place where the attack on the police stations took part. There was the police station, the Almaty City Police Department, and the Alma-Linsky District Department. And there was heavy fight for about day and a half. It was heavy fight. I was hearing the shooting practically in the night and in the day and so on. That there was a certain point when the police disappeared from the streets and tried to protect, as they said, the police stations and their stores of weapons and so on. Then when the special forces were engaged and were entered the city, they started to clean the city. And at that time, they start shooting. Another issue is the snipers. Who were these people who were shooting from the roofs of the different state buildings? That there is a lot of issues which have to be, investigated, and this is a serious problem. You remember that the events of Zhanaozen were not investigated properly, and that there was the Kazakhstan refuses to accept the proposal of the UN Human Rights Commissioner and the European Union and the OECD to have the international investigation of these events. That was 11. Don't know, and this creates some kind of impunity, for sure. It creates the feeling that there should be impunity. There was no police brought to justice. That now, of course, what we need for sure, we need the real investigation with the international experts involved in that to find out what happens, where and how. Because it happens not only in Almaty, in different cities, Tarask, Zorda, and so on. The commissions you mentioned, these are not commissions for investigation. These are more commissions for legal aid and to check how the people were detained, on what charges, and probably to allow some people to be released with the support of the prosecutor's office. And it happens. This is not about investigation. For the investigation to have independent fact-finding mission with the local independent experts, international experts, but to find out who made the shootings. Because with cases of torture and ill treatment, but we don't know about who are detained. We know that the who committed violence are detained, but what the police, what that those who shoot, whether they are detained, we don't have this information. The only we heard, I think you know about these events last to run, the policeman was detained, and then his colleagues came to the police station and demanded his release, and he was released in the night. That's because of the pressure. I think that it will be repaired, but we have some kind of very nervous situation in that regard. That it's
you're breaking. The sound is breaking.
If we want to find out this to happen, the reason this used who the so on in of the.
Evgeny, we're losing you. The sound is really breaking. The sound is very bad.
So now do you hear me?
Slightly better, but yeah.
This looks like something's going on with the internet, unfortunately.
Yes. Okay, maybe it will improve. Okay, well, yes. Try to finish, and then
yes,
we'll
I will try to finish. I think again that we need to have the full-fledged investigation with the independent international experts to find out what happens, because we do not have this investigation even in 1986.
Yes.
We don't know who were the well-known Almaty events. But we have to find it out, because the commissions which were founded, these are not about the investigations, more than to assist with the legal aid and to assist in establishing whether the people are lawfully detained with the support of General Prosecutor's Office. At this point, we have, as you heard, 227 people killed, but we don't have any understanding when, in what circumstances. Some of them were probably fighting with the police, but some were occasionally under the fire. Some were peaceful protesters who were killed by the snipers and so on. We have a lot of different information which we have to verify and to find out what happens. Otherwise, we will still be not protected from such kind of use of lethal force.
Thank you very much. I fully agree. Let me move to Sergey, and also I would ask Eldar to reply to this question. Let me locate it. Okay. Yes. How much flexibility would Kazakhstan have to redesign its political system, given potential pressures from Russia for a deeper integration following the rescue operation? And how do you see relationships with China playing out? So Russia and China. Sergey, do you want to start us?
Yeah, sure. Again, it will depend more on, I would say, on the sort of a activity and pressure of the civil society in Kazakhstan. How much pressure they exert on Tokayev and participate, not just exert, but to participate. So far, there have been, again, a lot of sort of a frustration and demands vented, but I haven't seen any idea, proposal, plan coming on the part of the same people who are sort of actively demanding change of, again, their ideas, plans of how that political system in Kazakhstan should be changed. They should not only sort of criticize and demand change, but also offer their ideas of where Kazakhstan should move in terms of the change in political system. As far as relations with sort of Russia and China, again, we should, I think, remember one thing, that it was Tokayev who came up with this concept of multi-vector diplomacy. And he was the one who has been putting it into practice since essentially the dawn of independence. And he was the one who, now 3 years ago, said no to Putin at the Eurasian Economic Community summit, where Putin proposed political and other forms of deeper integration. It was him who said no. So I think he is in a position to move Kazakhstan in the direction sort of he wants to. Again, he cannot do it alone, as we discussed, and should not do it alone. And I don't think that either Russia or China would want instability in Kazakhstan. Again, civil society is very much mobilized now, I mean, to a degree. Because again, we need sort of in that sense, it's not Russia and China who would be determining the sort of domestic political reform agenda, but Kazakhstani society and Tokayev. It remains to be seen, though, how much the said civil society wants to participate. I know it's just one example, but it's a very important and recent example of a protest in Almaty, which was authorized against the appointment of Tokayev as its mayor. But the other sort of a item on the agenda of that protest announced was for the election, not the appointment of hakims of all levels in Kazakhstan. And only under 100 people joined that protest. So again, we need activism and on the one hand, and on the other, we have Tokayev's ability to sort of pursue and which he has demonstrated so far, to pursue the that sort of independent course of action.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Eldar, can we go to you? What's your take on relations with Russia, Eurasian integration? What's going to happen?
It's certainly for Kazakhstan, it's a landlocked country. We somehow need to manage this relationship with our two closest neighbors, Russia and China. And China is growing as an off-take of the commodities out of Kazakhstan today. Today, it's certainly with the one belt, one road. They have most of the railway pipeline infrastructure goes through Kazakhstan, and it's very critical for them to have a stable neighbor. And another side is Russia, which is we have the very lengthy border with Russia. We still have the Russian-speaking population, and certainly it's from that point of view, we need to keep and manage this relationship. I wouldn't say it's not so straightforward that is somehow actually we may live independently, or I would say completely independently. We somehow actually it's our export roads go through Russia, and it's Russia also. It's you mentioned the customs union. It's a big, largest economic partner for Kazakhstan. Somehow we need to manage this relationship, and I would say these two countries will stay forever for Kazakhstan, and we need to be careful in managing this uneasy and I would say complicated relationship.
Would you expect more pressure from Russia to kind of deepen Eurasian economic integration? And President Tokayev mentioned Eurasian economic integration and kind of the potential that we need to do more. But at the same time, in the Kazakh society, the kind of the attitude to this is quite it's quite mixed, and but there are also negative sentiments. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think there will be more pressure, or they are too busy with other things, and actually it's not that important?
I would expect more. I would expect more because tension with Russia, with the West, it's increasing. We'll not know how it will end up, and certainly it's Russia would prefer to create its own club of the countries, and certainly we're coming to the more safe kind of country, what it was, the Содружество экономической взаимопомощи, and it's used to be. And I think it's certainly for Russia, it's from the economic point of view, creating the scale and for its economy, and certainly they would be interested to go and to cooperate with Kazakhstan more and to have the more tighter economic ties with Kazakhstan. We should be realistic about that.
Thank you very much. And speaking of the West, we had some questions about that as well. How should U.S.-Kazakhstan bilateral relations be updated to help Kazakhstan at this new stage of our development? And well, if we can kind of broaden it to the West as well, what the West can do, should do, and maybe we can kind of, I would like actually all the speakers to reflect on that for their spheres or in general. Eldar, maybe we can start with you and then we'll go to others.
Okay, it depends. It's looking for relationship for Kazakhstan, and Kazakhstan was of interest to the US in particular. It's primarily energy policy. It's more energy was interested. The second was it's primarily they were looking for their presence in the region, and it's a more rivalry between, I would say, Uzbekistan, and it's on the second plan was Kazakhstan. I don't know how it will go, and it's because it's given the interest and presence of the US in Afghanistan was critical. It doesn't seem no longer, and given it's quite a complicated job for geopolitics with the new regime in Afghanistan. It's more ties of China, Pakistan, and it's quite complicated. We don't know how actually Iran will go, and certainly US. I wouldn't say the Kazakhstan on the top priority. And that is something what we are sensing here, and how is actually they will be deeply involved in the such kind of the local or problems with our neighbors. And from that point of view, I would say for Kazakhstan, it's better to stay rational, to stay more self-reliant, and to see all the our interests and to see how it actually develops. The same relates to the West, which is today, it's also difficult to say what is West. It's Europe plus Great Britain, or it's I would say it's more France, Germany, plus, we'll see. But it's today, it's uneasy question,
I agree. That's why we're asking. Sergey, can we get to you?
Sure. Hi, Richard. Hi, George. I think, I mean, you've been there, you've done that sort of but right now there's actually demand from both the government, from the very top, starting with the president, and from the bottom for the overhaul of Kazakhstani political and economic system. So I would say that based on the, again, experience with all sorts of assistance programs and lessons learned, I think right now, again, the US government should come up with a package of those sort of let us say technical assistance programs to help and move Kazakhstan forward. The US government, I think, should also support the sort of a proposal by the European Union to sanction, that's just an idea, to sanction those police officers who sort of were involved in beatings and torture of the peaceful protesters, and also those who were sort of their commanding officers, because sort of commanding officers, those sort of exact perpetrators may not always be known, but as was suggested sort of by sort of human rights activists elsewhere, but the names of the commanding officers are always known and easy to find out. Again, explaining to the Kazakh government why it's kind of done, because that would help, in my opinion, President Tokayev to implement that reform, that outside pressure and sanctions on those officers would sort of help him sort of to drive the idea that these reforms are necessary into the ranks of the Ministry of Interior. And second, certainly, to defang the possible Thermidor coalition, the US government should support the demand by the Kazakhstanis and moves by various activists in the West to seize, freeze, and return the assets of, and the initiative of the government announced in that same direction to seize, freeze, and return the assets of the, not just members of the Nazarbayev family, but other oligarchs who whose fortune derived from stripping sort of the assets and stripping Kazakhstani people of all that wealth. I think that would be very helpful to both the Tokayev government and the Kazakhstani people.
Yes, let me get to let me ask Evgeny to also share your thoughts on that, and then we'll go to Aida for your thoughts on the issue.
Yeah. Very briefly, first of all, I understand very difficult geopolitical, let's say, constraints and geopolitical challenges of asking West to support, because being trapped between Russia and China, it's very difficult to expect some breakthrough in that regard, because inevitably the government needs to balance, and to do in current situation is to look whether there is a real political will to have certain systematic reforms, and then to assist, technical assistance, expert assistance, assistance of any kind, to start to build up the, let's say, so the new institutions, new procedures, to train new personnel and so on. Because even in the economy, I have the economical background to a certain extent. And I understand that it's very difficult to do something with the economy unless you do not have the independent judiciary, unless you do not have the rules of the game and the institutions which are able to maintain the rules of the game. Otherwise, it would be work in the same way, at least on the local level, even if you are trying to do something on the level on the top. And that's my second small point. I agree with Sergey about this stolen assets recovery, but I'm afraid that if we will not have the true legal procedure with the establishing what money are corrupt and what are not, what are, let's say, so washed money and the good money and bad money, I think that you know that it's very good word that it's not the fight against corruption, it's corporative Darwinism. If you are that's it, the most stronger are eating those who are weaker. I think that we have to be very careful with all these things to have the rule of law at the beginning. Thank you.
Which is quite a challenge. Aida, can we turn to you? What are your thoughts? What can be done?
You mean what can be done
in terms of cooperation with the West? If the West can help in any way in your area, in the area of communication?
You know, Nargis, saying about cooperation with the West, we can't ignore the fact that Kazakhstan is a place of foreign investment. Yes, we have so many investors from Netherlands, from United States, from Germany, from other countries, and from China in particular, and Russia as well. Therefore, we can't just ignore, you know, our relations with the West. But in terms of political reform, rule of law, and you know, we need to decide ourselves. Yes, we need to decide as a country, as a nation, what had happened, what we experienced these days. Yes, and we need to realize where we now and where we want to be. in the future, in the nearest futures and in the future. And no one can answer this question but us. Only us as the people of Kazakhstan, only us as the citizens, taxpayers, only us we should decide with whom we should go further, with whom we should deal, and with whom we should not deal. But first, we should be honest with ourselves. Once we honestly and openly will tell us what happened, who is probably not guilty. I don't like this wording, guilty or not guilty, but who is in charge, yes? What should we do next? And you know what I don't like now? I don't like that we here in Kazakhstan like enemies, you know. When I see these articles in newspapers, I just can't read them, just can't, you know, because I see that we all are brothers with such a small nation, such, you know, just 18 million or 19 million people. Why we shouldn't go to compromises? Why we should, you know, I don't understand this. This is the only question which I want to answer to myself, to my son, to my family, to my friends, you know, to my students, to my colleagues, to everybody. This is my answer. I don't know whether I answered or not, Nargis, but well, this is what I feel now.
I can't agree more, and I think that's really the perfect way to end the discussion. I do think that this is really a self-help situation at the moment, and we do need to figure out ourselves what we have become, what we can become, you know, what we can do. With that, let me thank our speakers for their very insightful, very informed inputs into our discussion. Let me thank the audiences, those who are here in this webinar and also watch us on YouTube. And let me thank our partners again at the Central Asian Program at the George Washington University and the Oxford Society for Central Asian Affairs. And last but not least, let me thank the wonderful team at the Davis Center, Chris Martin and Laura Sargent, who made this event possible. Thank you very much, and tune in into our next discussions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nargis.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Have a great
Bye.
day, you in America, and we are going to sleep now in Almaty.
Yes. Have a nice weekend. Please rest.